Well, sometimes stuff goes wrong.
Sometimes you just gotta hang out in the catacombs under the stairs for a second and recombobulate. Okay, let's go!
And we're back. To you, it probably seems like this much time has passed, but it's actually been a couple of weeks since I last worked on this. A whole bunch of life stuff and healing from a stab wound, plus a very exciting shoot out at the Satsop abandoned nuclear facility, which we've been daydreaming about for years, which went extremely well, very fun. Had a great time shooting with Johnny Valencia and Tom, who of course plays Jackie. But anyway, I'm back to it today and gonna see how much more of the framing I can get through. The first thing I did was to get started on some more hull ribs for the ship. This time around, I handled it pretty differently and didn't run into any major issues or template errors, which is great. I started by laying it out to scale on a piece of paper, just so I knew what my measurements would be, and then I converted that onto the larger stock material, cut it out, and got ready to route by connecting all of the pieces together, again, just like the first time. This time I went straight to cutting the stock, and I just took my time, and that worked out great. Ha ha ha, I knew it. Yes. Alright, now that I've got the bulk of the material, the holes removed, it's ready to go onto the router table, which means that I'm going to throw on my safety gear, and then it's time for us to listen to some elevator music. Elevator music. Here's the thing about elevator music. It's just whatever you listen to when you're in an elevator. Elevator music. Elevator music can be any genre, anything you wanna. This works on escalators too. Bet you didn't know that, did you? Alright, so I don't actually want to spend that much more time looking at bare wood framing. I want to get to the good stuff. So we're going to speed run a lot of this part. Obviously, you're seeing me put up a lot more paneling here, a mix of 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1/8 inch plywood, depending on the rigidity necessary from the wall in question. I used a vinyl sheet tacked along its vertical edges for those two rounded front corners of the bay, just to create sort of a natural hull shape. And for the bay door, which you can see already built lying out there, it's actually sandwiched foam. So on this piece, kind of the same as the larger sections here, I've just got foam. I'm going to be sandwiching it between some of this 1/8 inch plywood. Got a series of these teeny tiny little finish screws that I'm going to be using to tack it down into the exterior wood frame. So I'm going to skim all this out so that we've got a pretty good adhesion from the liquid nails all the way across. And then here you can see me beginning to mark out what I was going to do with this extra folding panel flap, although amusingly that part of the build has since been scrapped in favor of a different shooting approach. So I started to add trim, puttying up the seams, screws to anchor everything down, and then hot gluing some little 3D printed rivets over the screws just to hide them. Fun fact, you can also use googly eyes for rivets anywhere you know you're going to be painting them anyway. And in fact, I did this pretty liberally in the areas where I didn't have to cover up little protruding screw heads. Next up was a series of cabinets which are going to go against the bottom of the far wall in the bay, and these are just made out of wood shelving, basically cheap stuff. For the most part, There isn't going to be functional storage in a lot of the spaceship. You'll see me putting on some doors here and little hinges. Those will eventually be hidden. I actually made a lot of these little doors since we're going to be having some on various surfaces around other parts of the inside of the bay, just to add the suggestion that there are a lot of storage spaces here, although most of them won't function. And we can add in slides and hinges later if we want to any extras.
So the details on the bay are starting to come together. But there's still a few places that I want to break up that feeling of flat boxiness. Like this little welt right here, where the ladder up to the cockpit is eventually going to be. And I want to have a sort of a step-up place. It's going to have storage underneath it. I kind of wanted to have the vibe of like the shape of the edges of a hot tub, where it feels like there's some sort of hardware underneath a formed area. There's mechanisms down here that couldn't fit at the same level as the flat of the floor.
So I built a little pretty straightforward frame in the shape that I wanted, and then it was time to panel it.
So one of the parts of this set that I'm personally the most excited for is cutaways, sort of an X-ray view. I don't know if any of you had those like exploded diagram books when you were kids, but I was obsessed with that stuff. It's something I haven't really seen a whole lot of in media, at least not media with high production quality. And it's actually something we did sort of like an early test version of way back in Dynamo Season 1 with the box fort, which was another really fun set to build. And it's something I'll be doing a fair amount with this set, where there are places people aren't going to be moving. You will hopefully be able to see into like the guts of the ship, interior workings, plumbing, electrical, that kind of stuff. It'll be aesthetic, not just untouched. And I'm going to go ahead and make some of these like silhouette panels that have windows that show you inside. Just in case we ever see it in like a wide pulled back, hopefully it'll be kind of a fun aesthetic. This is a good point in the process for me to start figuring out where to put some of the delicious garbage that I have collected. A number of these pieces that have some depth to them, like this one, will benefit significantly from being inset into their surfaces so they feel more like they are a contiguous part of the space, rather than that they're just tacked onto a flat surface. So I've cut a little hole for the actual winch control into this gas can. And I've got these cables that come off of this. It's time for me to start actually running wires through the ship. As much as possible, I'm going to try to hide the functional stuff because that's how it would be in real life. The less it looks like I've kludged stuff together, the better. Alright, so we've got a variety of these good little panels that are simulating drawers or doors, pulls for cabinets. They'll eventually be getting hit with a filler primer, sanded smooth, and then painted again to look like enamel-coated metal.
And I got some of these good little drop handles flush mount onto a surface. They have sort of like an airplane storage energy to them that I like. They look inconvenient, which is kind of the vibe, weirdly, I'm going for. So on all the doors, I marked out the locations where I would need to route pockets for these flush handles to drop into. At this point in the process, with all of the panels and basic details up, it was time for me to start thinking about painting. So I used some ABS pipe at the bottom of plastic sheeting to create retractable exclusion zone panels. They, although not perfectly airtight, do a decent job of closing off the main space where I'll be painting from the rest of the building, so that when I spray, I don't have to worry about particulate drifting away and then settling into electronics or what have you. I'm going to be also sheeting up the area in the bay where I'm painting specifically for an extra layer of protection. I then decided to do one more pass of up-detailing and adding as much of the basic elements as I could think of that would eventually need to be getting this metal enamel treatment finish inside of the bay's area. So I went through with a variety of trim, piping, conduit, etc., and made sure that I had broken up as many of the flat walls as I could and created visual interest in shapes within the space before I decided to start the paint pass. I didn't actually capture the filling process in that much detail. The bay at this point is separated off from even the sheeted larger area of the room with a piece of drop plastic, and I poked just the lens of my camera through a little hole I cut in the plastic, and the camera's lens itself was wrapped in a piece of cling film to prevent paint particulate from getting on it and ruining it. But that was about as much setup as I could get before basically I was incapacitated for further setups by being covered in sticky and noxious paint. So this is what you get. It's gray, which is great. Anyway, still needs a color pass and some other stuff. But for now, I'm going to be working on continuing to add details to as many of the surfaces as I can. Anything else that gets this primer gray is going to get painted outside and then brought back in to install once it's dry. Alright, there we go. I don't know how easy it will be to appreciate the surface finish on this, but this is actually a great reference point for the color and material type I'm going to try to finish the entirety of the bay in. So it's nice to have a reference object so that I can more closely match it when I get around to doing the paint. But before I could do the big color pass, I needed to hit a couple more primary elements for the bay. Starting with these interlocking plastic, I think they're like exterior flooring tiles, maybe for a garden or a pathway or something. They're pretty easy to work with, and they're a relatively soft material, so I was able to just cut them to shape so that they would all fit perfectly into the shape of the unusual profile of the bay's floor. These also eventually got painted black, which you'll see later, to match the corrugated vinyl flooring that I used for the remainder of the horizontal surfaces, as well as the ramp in this area. I then spent some time continuing to increase and improve the level of detail and amount of objects included in the kit bashed modules, as well as creating some new ones on top of what I already had in place. I would cut out pieces of plastic from the garbage that I collected so that they would fit as snugly as possible with what was already there, sometimes using a heat gun to bend and form the plastic bits to fit to each other a little bit better. And then as each new one got adhered, I would gradually, slowly fill the seams between them with elastopatch, which is effectively a caulking material, which helps them all to feel like one unified piece that was cast in a single go, as opposed to a collection of miscellaneous garbage. We're getting pretty close to ready to do the big color paint pass on the bay, which is great. But there's a couple things I want to do first, just items that are going to get hit with the same blue tone I'm using for the overall wall and structure color. Notably, in this case, the lamp housings that are going to go up into the holes I cut in the ceiling. Got some interesting long Edison bulb style dimmable LEDs that are going to be living up in the recessed portions. And then I've got these bits and pieces that I've 3D printed over the last few days, which I'm just going to go ahead and assemble. The cage for the lights, I'm actually going to make out of this steel shelving that I'm just going to repaint. So I assembled the parts for the housings, trimmed to size pieces of the shelving that I would need for the cages, and then I improvised a pipe bender out of a variety of loose materials that I had around the shop and used that to form the cut pieces of metal so that they would neatly fit into the oval shapes of the housings. They were affixed to the roof of the bay with some screws, pretty simple, and then I climbed up above so that I could run the lamp cord for the Edison bulbs where it wouldn't ever be seen by the camera. Nice. Always gratifying to see something work for the first time. Alright, so we got the filler coat down. We smoothed down all the surfaces we could. I went for it on a hand of places. I used a joint wallboard compound and that elastopatch to create some surface texture so it looked a little bit like pitted or rusted metal that's been painted over and over again. And also I went through and hit a number of surfaces with just this metallic spray paint. Rust-Oleum Bright Coat is what I usually use. And now it's time for the secret weapon. Mustard! There's actually a couple different ways to do this. I'm going to be using mustard this time. But basically what you do, I've used this on a lot of my smaller props, just upscaling it here, is that after you've got your nice metallic coat down, you paint on mostly raised corners, places where people be like to bump or brush against that might get worn down. You just put globs of this stuff, and it prevents the paint from curing to the surface there. So after the latex wall paint I'm about to use for the prime color has had a chance to dry, I come back through with a paper towel and I wipe off the globs of mustard underneath the uncured paint, revealing the metal below, and that makes it look like the paint has chipped off with time. With my set thoroughly slathered in zesty condiment, it was time for me to do the primary paint pass. Very exciting. Unfortunately, all you're going to get to see of that is this terrible shot through a glossy plastic sheet because my camera ran out of recording space and I didn't notice until after I had already finished the color. So instead you're going to get a reveal all at once. Ta-da! It's blue. Wow. Okay, so here you see me putting in the flush drop handles for all of the little cabinet doors. They're a nice bright tone, which goes well with the Rust-Oleum Bright Coat metal spray paint that I used for the undercoat on the chipped areas of the bay. Helps, again, just to bring all of the little pieces together so that they look like they belong in the same space.
especially for folks like me who make things at home using relatively low precision instruments. So I do a lot of 3D printed parts, for instance. There's this great principle of borrowing a tolerance, where you take something from a pre-existing high accuracy object and you use it for your part. Instead of, for instance, 3D printing threads, you could use an insert to create really accurate threads and melt it into the surface of your part. This is a principle I also try to use in my set building and my prop making. In this case, I'm borrowing a finish. So I've got this module that I kit bashed together from garbage, but it feels a lot like a bunch of pieces of wood and plastic glued together, and having just one anchor object, in this case this proper, beautiful, rusty steel handle, having this built into the object gives it a heck of a lot more believability immediately. And when we're looking at a shot, we usually look at the shot as a general rule. Our eyes skim over stuff, and if something stands out as an issue, that'll last with us. But there's these things that can just cue the brain to, oh, that feels like a thing. And if you start with one thing that can anchor an object that is otherwise fine, like 70% of the way there, that can get you a really long way. Good way to balance your time, budget, and yet still get a good product.
To cover all of the currently unfinished surfaces, I picked up a roll of this corrugated flooring from the hardware store. It's the kind of stuff you'd see in an industrial space, and I think that works nicely for this application. Plus, it's got all these little grooves, which will catch the light nicely, and as they slowly fill up with grime, will give us a really nice used space texture. I imagine by the time we're actually shooting in this space, a lot of natural grime will have accumulated, which, that's free weathering. These were adhered down with a mixture of contact cement and then held at the edges a little bit more firmly in place with a staple gun. These corners don't have to be pretty because eventually they're going to be hidden under a trim of our secondary color in the Bay Area, which won't be included in this episode, but it's going to be a nice mustard yellow. There'll be a couple of little accents, including trim that covers these corners and a couple of other spots. I then repeated this process for the other surfaces that needed the same materials treatment to bring a sense of visual homogeneity to the space, namely the Bay's loading ramp, followed by the hallway that leads to the main body of the ship. Now, we're not going to see this area a whole lot, at least in the first few shoots, but we might see the stairs leading edge, and it'll be nice to have this part done by the time we get around to doing the hallway. Anyway, might as well do these types of materials all at once. I was then extremely graceful for a second.
Nice.
Fortunately, nothing broke. So, although I forgot to record the part where I did the corrugated vinyl on the currently open bay door, I did manage to get this bit where I put the now painted plastic flooring back into the bay. So, here's a couple of pseudo-glamour shots of where things are at this point in the process. I'm pretty pleased it's really starting to come together. I hope you can see where things are headed at this point. It's actually come a little bit farther since this, but I think we're going to call it here for this episode. What's next is for me to put in some little lights and doohickeys, as well as the major hero elements of the bay. The fully fabricated, fully custom pieces that will really bring this thing home. And if all goes to plan, the next episode will actually see the bay completely finished, to the point of being screen ready, since we are hoping to shoot the first of our scenes that take place in this area in the next month or two. So, see you soon.